Chapman. See you 3:45 Wednesday. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, the tale of two spreadsheets. The government books are healthier than expected, but after almost 9 weeks in the COVID trenches, some Auckland businesses need urgent resuscitation, with growing calls for targeted assistance. Tracking 2 COVID cases through Taitokoro, Delta grows another tale, the benefit queue, with thousands losing their jobs. It's a blast from the past, but the target this time is jabs, not money. The Vaxathon's coming to a town near you. The Hunger Games of sport, which codes will survive the cull for the Commonwealth Games? And is the much maligned moped cool again? Well, apparently so, in Wellington at least. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. Whangarei's mayor fears COVID may be spreading undetected in the north after a second woman who travelled there illegally tested positive for the virus. The woman was tracked down by police last night after she was linked to another positive case last week. The PA have provided very little information about where they travelled and who they came into contact with. Cheryl Mai says that with so few locations of interest, she fears COVID has yet to be detected and it's vital people get tested.
What we're hoping is that people will get tested even if they're feeling well. That's the most important message, is get tested even if you're vaccinated, because probably if people have been exposed to it but they've been vaccinated, they may be feeling very well but still can pass the virus on.
The Subway store in Whangarei was this afternoon revealed as the latest location of interest in Northland. The National Party is warning the government needs to do more to support Auckland businesses in order to stop its books falling deeper into the red. Final accounts for the year to June show a deficit of $4.6 billion compared with forecasts in May of more than $15 billion. Last year the deficit was $29.6 billion, but National Party's Andrew Bailey warns the financial statements tell two stories.
So if you're an export, it's great, and no wonder the tax revenue's up from that perspective. If you're a struggling retail business in Auckland, it's a totally different story, and I think that's where the real issue is. We haven't seen the impact of Delta coming through in these accounts.
Andrew Bailey says the government needs to do more for Auckland businesses on the brink of collapse. The man who breached Alert Level 3 by flying out of Whangarei is understood to have slipped through before more security checks were added. The man flew from Whangarei to Wellington on Saturday, staying in a hotel before flying to Queenstown the next morning. A team of aviation security officers arrived on the first flight from Auckland on Saturday to assist under Level 3. Whangarei District Airport Manager Michael Chubb says the man would have checked in before they landed. He says they now have checks at the airport's entrance.
Nobody goes in without a ticket to fly, and they don't go in until they've been cleared by aviation security. But the very first flight, might have been a couple of holes in it.
Michael Chubb says there were police on the ground at the time. The man has tested negative for COVID-19. 8,500 more people have ended up on the benefit since the start of the Delta outbreak. Prior to the return to Alert Level 4 in August, the number of people receiving government support had been steadily declining. Most of the increase in benefit numbers is people going on to job seeker support. Half of them are in Auckland. Beneficiary advocates say the $20 increase to benefits in July was welcome, but not enough to make a material difference. Economists say much of that would have been eaten up by inflation and rising household costs. A 34-year-old man has been charged with wasting police time following the search for a man and his children in the King Country last month. Police say the charges are in relation to the search for Thomas Phillips and his 3 children after they went missing near the coastal community of Marukopa on September the 11th. A local woman involved in the search agrees it was an unnecessary use of search and rescue resources. She says the family's disappearance affected the whole community.
I know there are some residents and family that are relieved that they are alive, but are also annoyed that they spent a long time and a great effort in putting their own time into, looking for him and his children.
She says the King Country community felt it was their responsibility to search for the family, but ultimately it was a good outcome. It's 5:04. Changes to the Commonwealth Games program could boost New Zealand's prospects of hosting the event. The Commonwealth Games Federation has slashed the number of compulsory sports from 16 to 2 from 2026, allowing host countries to decide much of the program. Only athletics and swimming must be included. Kieran Smith, the head of the New Zealand's Olympic and Commonwealth Games body, believes the changes open the way for multiple host cities within a country.
These do open the door for more consideration alongside the really good venues that we have across New Zealand and our craziness about sport and our love of many of these Commonwealth sports in particular. I think certainly there's conversations to be had about the future hosting of the Games in New Zealand.
Birmingham will host next year's Games, while Halifax in Canada is favoured to host 2026. New Zealand last hosted the Games in Auckland in 1990. The South Island women's team in next year's Super Rugby Aupiki competition will be called Matatu. Matatu, which means steadfast, will join the Blues, Chiefs and Hurricanes in the competition, which was announced last week. Meanwhile, promotion relegation has been scrapped from the Men's Provincial Championship this year. And four-time world champions Germany have become the first team to join host Qatar for the 2022 World Cup after a 4-0 win over North Macedonia. That's the news.
One for a party, one for a person.
25 years of MMP.
Jim Anderson, Rob Donald, the Fitzsimons lady who led the Greens. Whoever would have heard of those people if it hadn't been for MMP?
We are starting negotiations with both National and Labour, and within 3 days I'm being accused of holding the country to ransom.
The irony, I think, 25 years later, we have a single-party government.
Marking all milestones. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Ko te matapai huarere mo Aotearoa. Here's the short forecast from mid-service to midnight Wednesday for Northland to Waitongo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Fine spells and a few showers, clearing from Auckland southwards tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, a few showers south of Hastings, spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also wided upper. Scattered showers, some heavy with hail today, turning to rain in Wellington and wided upper for a time tomorrow with southerly gales, snow to 900 metres. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, except the Kaikoura coast. Scattered showers today, possibly heavy with hail, mainly fine tomorrow. For Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast, a few showers, turning to rain for a time tomorrow with snow to about 500 metres. Severe southwest gales about Banks Peninsula, easing tomorrow. For Western, mainly fine with the odd shower. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers with snow above 400 metres, easing tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain. It's 5:07.
Kia ora rā, e ho tēnā koutou katoa no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight it's a tale of two spreadsheets, one healthier than expected, the other needing urgent resus. In Wellington, the government threw open its books, talking of resilience and pandemic bounce back, with its bottom line considerably stronger than expected, for now. But further up the island in Auckland, restaurants, bars, retail and other businesses have been locked down or in tight COVID restrictions for almost 9 weeks, and there's still no date for them to reopen to real-life customers. Their books are looking considerably leaner. The government's financial statements to the end of June showed strong tax revenues, lower expenses and less debt than forecast, but that's before the Delta outbreak cast a dark shadow over the coming months. And National is warning things will get even more grim unless more is done to support Auckland businesses. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The economy had recovered stronger and faster than expected after the 2020 lockdown and had been ticking away nicely. Until the August lockdown, that is, as summed up by the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson.
I was tempted to say once upon a time in a land far, far away, the 30th of June feeling some considerable length of time ago now.
Final accounts for the year show a deficit of $4.6 billion compared with forecasts in May of more than $15 billion. Last year, the deficit was $29.6 billion. The strength of the rebound from the COVID-19 restrictions underpinned a rise in the tax take of more than $6 billion, while expenses were below the budget forecast. The net debt level was also below forecast at just over 30% of the value of the economy. Grant Robertson says this shows the economy can bounce back from the pandemic.
While the events of the last 2 months do cast somewhat of a shadow over these accounts, what they do indicate is the strength and resilience of the New Zealand economy, and that does bode well for the future, including our rebound from the latest restrictions.
But National Party's Andrew Bailey warns the financial statements tell two stories.
So if you're an export, it's great, and no wonder the tax revenue's up from that perspective. If you're a struggling retail business in Auckland, it's a totally different story, and I think that's where the real issue is. We haven't seen the impact of Delta coming through in these accounts.
Andrew Bailey says the government needs to do more for Auckland businesses on the brink of collapse.
What we're seeing is, to some extent, a large flushing of money coming through from the spend up from the COVID fund to try and support some of those businesses. In many cases, some of that is ill-directed. What we prefer to see is government supporting businesses, particularly around their rent payments. And I think ultimately what we want to see is we want to get through these lockdowns so that we can actually allow these businesses to get on and employ more people.
Businesses in Auckland have already said they need additional support, with some calling for the wage subsidy to continue until Christmas. The Finance Minister says there is capacity to continue help for those struggling through the wage subsidy in Level 3 and the resurgence payment in Level 2.
The resources are there. We topped up the COVID relief fund to make sure that we were in a position to continue to do that, and so I'm very confident about our ability to do that. In terms of further support for Auckland, we are talking to Auckland businesses. We're working on what might be possible as we go forward from here.
What that support might look like is eagerly awaited by businesses in the City of Sales.
And joining me now is the Chief Executive of the Newmarket Business Association, Mark Knopf-Thomas. Kia ora, Mark. So the government's pretty upbeat about its books. Lower debt than expected, higher tax take, debt to ratio better than well expected. Are they reading the room in terms of their position versus businesses in Auckland?
Well, kia ora, Lisa. 100% no, they're not. I think it's fabulous to hear Grant Robertson so optimistic. But I wonder who will be left to share his optimism. I think they don't fully grasp the enormity of what individual small business owners are suffering right now. Last week, the Prime Minister said there would be some announcements regarding hospitality specifically this week. And we're at Tuesday already, and that's another week of uncertainty. That's another week of hospitality and retail owners not knowing what's going to happen. There seems to be no pathway coming out for how people can sort of cling on to or work towards a framework to get their businesses back up and running. There are no targets being set. All the Prime Minister was talking about is picnics, bubbles and Vaxathons. I don't think they understand the sentiment in the business world at all.
Okay, let's dig down into some of that. What level of confidence do you have that business will be able to open next week? Because that's when it's going to be considered again by Cabinet.
Well, the R value is nudging 1.3 in terms of the COVID infection rate, so that doesn't bode well. So that we could be seeing, triple-digit daily totals very, very soon. I don't think the Prime Minister would want to wear the risk of opening up until we've got the R rate down below 1 again. But what I'd like to see is the Prime Minister to say that we can get to level 3.2, or whatever 3.2 is, but when we get to a so-and-so percentage. So when we get to 3.2 at this many vaccinations, we can get to 3.3 at this many vaccinations. I know she's had a reluctance to go towards targets because I think she said yesterday that was feedback she'd had from overseas, but I think that seems a wee bit odd when, we all understand targets.
So, Mark, just to be clear on this, obviously some states in Australia are doing this. You're saying that you want, for example, and I just use this as an example, when we get to 70% fully vaccinated, this is what will be allowed. When we get to 80%, this is what will be allowed. Do you want something as clear-cut as that?
I think that would go a long way to help people understand that there is a pathway out of this. I don't know what the percentage rate should be, and that's where you need advice from health experts to verify that. But I think there needs to be a sort of a set platform and a framework to help people understand how we're going to get through this. I know she set a target of 100,000 vaccinations on Saturday. That's fantastic, and that is a target she set. But let's look at how we can do that across the board to give businesses a lifeline and some hope of how they can continue.
What are your members saying about targets and whether they support them?
100% of the members I've polled want targets and goals and milestones. Everybody wants it.
Okay, so if you are not optimistic that your businesses can actually physically open next week, and as you point out, the reproduction rate for COVID is higher than authorities would like, what then should there be in terms of support? The Finance Minister has just said that he is talking to Auckland business. He has had conversations. Have any of them been with you or the businesses you support?
No, not to my knowledge. Nobody I've spoken to has had any dealings with the Minister of Finance or the ministry at this stage. But what we'd like to see is him to announce something that, yes, we're going to continue the wage subsidy and the resurgence payment through level 2 for Auckland businesses specifically. We'd like to see some certainty. What is frustrating, really frustrating, is the lack of communications to business to say this is what we are doing. So I know that the situation financially, we're in a better situation than we expected, which is fantastic. Now let's come out to business and say, right, guys, we are going to do X, Y, and Z to support you. That gives business something to hold on to start planning.
I want some specifics here, Mark. So at the moment, there's the wage subsidy and there's resurgence payments, right? So in resurgence payments, you get $1,400 plus $400 per full-timer, up to 50 workers. Wage subsidy, full-time workers, $600, part-time, $359. When a business gets that, what are they short, Mark? What is left to pay? What is the outstanding costs that people are having to dip into savings, overdraft or debt to cover?
Well, I'll tell you what, even with all that support, most businesses will be dipping into other lines of credit or their own savings, their retirement funds. People are mortgaging their houses to prop up their businesses.
Do you know themselves. People who are doing that, Mark, or do you know people who have done that?
100%. Yes, I do. So that is, the government support is not like a panacea to cure everything, but it is something. It is something to give them an ongoing sort of lifeline. But most businesses are going out and they're exhausting their credit lines as well. So, some places I've spoken to, they can no longer get stock supplies because they've run out of credit. They've blown their credit terms. It's really quite dire.
I know you have called before for the wage subsidy to be guaranteed until Christmas for Auckland businesses. In terms of payments at level 2, which is what you want, wage subsidy for the entire level 2 period for Auckland, no matter how long it lasts, Mark?
I think that's a reasonable thing to request.
Why do you say it's reasonable?
Because there's been nothing else coming from government to give certainty to business to sort of see them through this. Even when we get to level 2, it is still not an even playing field for business to trade. Hospitality is still handicapped insofar as their numbers are limited. There are still restrictions in place for retail. There are still restrictions across the board. So nobody, despite what the Minister of Finance may say, nobody is in a position to trade at almost at full capacity. That is not reality. Hospitality in particular is really handicapped and takes a long time to get back. They didn't even recover last year, actually. They didn't recover last year.
Mark, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about vaccinations, right? The government's mandating vaccinations for teachers and a whole raft of health workers. What do businesses need in terms of a direction about requiring customers and or staff to be vaccinated? What do you need?
We would like, I think, a mandate from government to say, yes, this is a requirement, because it can't fall on the responsibility of the individual business to say, right, you can come in or you can't. It needs to be a mandate saying, right, businesses have got the right to pick and choose who comes into their business if they're vaccinated or not. I think some guidance and some strong mandate from the government would go a long way to help that.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's Mark Knopf-Thomas, who is the boss of the Newmarket Business Association. It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. E haere ake nei, it's back to the future. The Vaxathon is coming to a town near you. There are fears COVID may be spreading undetected in Northland after a second woman who visited illegally from Auckland tested positive for the virus. She was tracked down by police officers last night and is now in a managed isolation facility where authorities have been interviewing her today. Another location of interest was revealed this afternoon, the subway in Whangarei. But with other locations still under wraps, everyone is being urged to get a test to track any trace of the virus. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Another day with no Northland Covid cases today, but that's little comfort to Whangarei Mayor Cheryl Mai.
I'm fearful that we've got community spread that hasn't yet been detected. That's my greatest fear.
With a second woman who visited the north testing positive for COVID, Mai fears the region's risk of infection is even higher. That woman today revealed Whangarei subway as a place she visited, along with the original positive case. While she's said to be helping health teams, unlike the initial case, there are still just 7 locations of interest during their 4-day trip to Whangarei, Paihia and Kawakawa. Mai says the community is in limbo as they wait to see where they went, and it's vital as many people as possible get tested.
What we're hoping is that people will get tested even if they're feeling well. That's the most important message, is get tested even if you're vaccinated, because probably if people have been exposed to it but they've been vaccinated, they may be feeling very well but still can pass the virus on.
That targeted testing is proving tricky when so few locations of interest have been revealed. Police have so far been relying heavily on CCTV, and health authorities are checking wastewater for any sign of the virus. But with just 60% of the Whangarei district and 30% of far north properties on the reticulated supply, that's not nearly as effective as the rest of the country. Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield says swabbing is vital right now.
Testing remains a really important part of our efforts to aggressively find and then contain any cases, so please keep that up.
Usually testing is targeted at those who have come into contact with a case. In this situation, he says those people will likely know who they are.
People we really want to be tested are the ones who know they have had contact with them, and they don't need to they don't need to say who they are, but as I've appealed over the last couple of days, just go and be tested.
Those tests are being carried out at pop-up clinics right across Te Tai Tokerau. 1,200 swabs were taken across the rohi yesterday. Kawakawa testing crews had to get more swabs from Whangarei today, and Moire vaccinators were reporting lots of first-time shots. Te Hau Awhiowhio o Tangarei Trust Chief Executive Martin Kaipo says that increased demand is being seen in Otangarei too, one of Whangarei's least vaccinated suburbs.
We've reached the low-lying fruit, and now we're starting to get those who would never come forward.
Martin Kaipo says they've vaccinated about 240 people over the past few days, including about 30 gang members and their whānau. He says those people are not coming forward because of any involvement with the Northland cases, but because they've had encouragement from their leaders.
They're getting tested and vaccinated purely because their leadership has set the example for them to let's do this. Let's throw away any speculations that publicing will come our way. And let's do our part. And again, the message that the common message was is that there's a bigger enemy than gangs, and that's Delta.
As for the women at the centre of the outbreak, police say no decision will be made around charges until the situation has been investigated.
It is 23 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Get ready for a blast from the past. The government's turning back the clock to try to wind up vaccine rates across the country. A telethon will hit New Zealand screens this Saturday, although this time it's a Vaxathon. The Prime Minister hopes the televised event, part of a nationwide vaccine push, will encourage hordes of people to roll up their sleeves. Here's political reporter Katie Scotcher.
Thank you very much to the folks out there. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very, very much.
Telethons are back, pandemic style.
This Saturday between 12 and 8 p.m. on Channel 200 and supported to date by Discovery, screened on 3 and Māori TV and streaming on Hahana Facebook, will be holding a Vaxathon.
The Vaxathon is part of the government's nationwide immunisation push this Saturday, Super Saturday.
The Vaxathon will include real-time data on how each region is tracking with vaccination uptake throughout the day. There will be prizes locally for those getting vaccinated, information from experts on the safety of the vaccine, and some healthy competition between towns and regions.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says there's capacity for more than 100,000 vaccines to be administered in one day.
Vaccinations will be available throughout the day and into the night on Saturday across GP clinics, many of whom are opening especially for the day. Pharmacies, marae, churches, mosques, community centres, workplaces and drive-through centres.
Jacinda Ardern has set a challenge too.
Our current vaccination record for a single day is 93,334 vaccines in one day, which was on the 26th of August. And our biggest number of vaccines in a single week is 552,586, and that was the week ending the 5th of September. So those are the records that we should try and beat this week.
Ms Ardern says the government wants to see a surge in vaccination rates this weekend, not case numbers. 43 new community cases were reported today, 40 in Auckland and 3 in Waikato. 19 of today's cases are unlinked, but interviews with health officials are still underway. The Waikato cases are household contacts who were already in isolation. There are 34 people being treated for COVID-19 in hospital, with one person on ventilation.
The country's largest union appears hesitant to see more vaccination mandates rushed through Cabinet. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has announced school staff and high-risk health workers will have to be vaccinated. But an epidemiologist says there needs to be more where that came from and says the private sector should be able to make mandates too. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and camera ops Nick Monroe and Samuel Rilstone have the story.
Close, a good start, but not enough. That's the review from leading epidemiologist Professor Rod Jackson on new government mandates that all school staff who work with students and high-risk health and disability staff must get the jab to keep the job.
We need to go much further. I'd like to see police, definitely supermarkets, any population or any workforce that's working with either a vulnerable population, so obviously healthcare is such an obvious one, or an unvaccinated population, which is why education is a complete no-brainer. But, we need to go much further than that.
And it's not just the public sector. Businesses, big, small, public-facing, offices or otherwise, need the government green light to mandate vaccinations too.
Businesses are screaming out for it. I know a lot of businesses are doing it, tentatively, but they really need to be given it as soon as possible because, this is a race against time.
So we took that to some businesses. We drop in on the few bakeries, bottle-os and baristas open on a mostly deserted K Road. Some say it shouldn't be mandatory, but others agree with Professor Jackson. No jab, no job.
Personally, I don't think it should be mandatory for office-run businesses to make it mandatory. Maybe they could give a choice whether they can get a vaccination or they can do, maybe like a weekly test or something like that. But in terms of storefront businesses, I still don't know about mandatory, but I think it should be more incentivized. I think people should have a reason to get vaccinated if they are running a storefront.
I think a lot of people has doing it, so I think we all should do it, and then we could move on to, to level 2 or something.
Meanwhile, the public sector's not quite up to speed with Professor Jackson's urgency, but Public Service Association National Secretary Kerry Davies says that's for good reason.
So that people can be assured that we're doing the mandates on the basis of health and safety, and that we are targeting the most risky jobs to be mandated.
So we take the vaccine mandates and whether they should be widened to the country's public sector engine room. Everyone spoken to while wandering Wellington streets say vaccines should be mandatory across the entire public sector.
I think any organisation that has to do with the public needs to have that mandated, I think.
Totally support it. It's the only way to get out of lockdowns.
I'd be honestly more than happy for more mandates to be placed.
I'd be for it. I think we all need to be out and about. Everyone wants to have a great summer. Everyone wants next year to be back to normal, so
90% has long been the golden goose the government wants to grab before saying goodbye to lockdowns. But Professor Jackson remains convinced 95% has to be the goal.
The 10% of people, in that last 10%, one, it's 400,000+ people, and also the evidence is increasingly clear that they're the highest risk population. So the people who are hardest to reach for vaccination are the easiest to reach for the virus, and they also tend to be poor, they're living in overcrowded conditions, they're marginalised in lots and lots of ways. And the evidence, for example, from the UK is that 10% of people were responsible for 80% of all new infections. So 90% is really not good enough.
For now, the country sits on 58% double dosed, many hoping more mandates bring a bit of a boost.
And if you were listening to that on radio, we'll put that piece from the two Nicks and Sam on our Facebook page so you can check out the video. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What other professions, jobs, businesses do you reckon should have a mandate for vaccination, compulsory vaccination? Which other areas do you think the government should make it so? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz and let us know why. If you disagree, let us know why not as well. A shake-up of the Commonwealth Games program has left some sports worried about their future in the event. From 2026, the number of compulsory sports will drop from 16 to 2, just athletics and swimming. That leaves other sports facing the prospect of having a pinnacle event chopped. Felicity Reid reports.
Before on the New Zealand women's hockey team, and it's their 6th match of the campaign, and it's the one that counted the most. They had 1 gold.
New Zealand won 15 gold medals across 9 sports at the last Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast in 2018. Among them were lawn bowls, boxing and hockey, all among the Games' usual core sports. But after next year's Games in Birmingham, those sports will no longer be guaranteed events. It's as Games bosses try to make hosting more attractive, having struggled to convince cities to bid for the event. New Zealand Olympic boss Kieran Smith, who's also Vice President of the Commonwealth Games Federation, says it's because cities want more choice, and that includes the sports on offer. But she doesn't expect a dramatic change in the future.
The core sports that we've seen on programs such as your netballs and hockeys and rugby sevens in recent years, along with gymnastics and bowls and netball, etc. I'm sure they will largely stay the same. It just gives a few more options to a host.
One sport desperate to remain in the Commonwealth Games is boxing. It has been in every Games since 1930, and New Zealand has won 37 medals, including 7 gold. Boxing New Zealand Chairman Keith Walker says the Commonwealth Games is the event where they can promote their sport.
That is our key event. That's an event that historically we have actually performed very well at, and we target that as being our main international event. So yes, we'd be most anxious to see that it continues.
The Silver Ferns finished outside the medals and recorded their worst ever finish at a Games in 2018. The campaign to get back on the podium next year is already underway. Netball New Zealand CEO Jenny Wiley says netball is one of the first sports to sell out stadiums at the Games, and she's confident her code will continue to make commercial sense for the hosts. However, Wiley says the discussion about changing the Games program could be the nudge netball needs to make progress globally.
The real highlighting of maintaining your relevance is not something that we should ignore. And World Netball won't be doing that. And I think it's really important because it will prompt more urgency around discussions, for example, around a men's strategy, around future forms of the game, and around our digital and broadcast reach.
As well as greater freedom to select urban and esports in a bid to appeal to younger audiences, host cities will be encouraged to select entirely new disciplines that are popular locally. Karen Smith says importantly, a part of their plan is an opportunity for there to be multiple host cities within a country. That could open the way for New Zealand, which has hosted the Games 3 times, the last in 1990.
I think these do open the door for more consideration alongside the really good venues that we have across New Zealand and our craziness about sport and our love of many of these Commonwealth sports in particular. I think certainly there's conversations to be had about the future hosting of the Games in New Zealand.
Halifax in Canada appears to be the front runner to host the 2026 Commonwealth Games, with a decision expected in the coming months.
And that report from Felicity Reid. E te iwi e haere nei e a checkpoint. Thousands more people have moved on to the benefit during lockdown. How are Auckland businesses staying afloat 9 weeks into lockdowns and raised alert levels? And mopeds are back in fashion. For real? Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening, particularly though around mandatory vaccination. Which workplaces do you think should be allowed to, force staff to be vaccinated? Should the government make the call? Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Marama.
Thanks, Lisa. A business lobby group says the government is not providing enough clarity as it looks to get out of the current COVID-19 outbreak. The Finance Minister earlier today announced a better-than-expected financial position and says the economy's resilience will mean it recovers from the lockdown more quickly. But the Newmarket Business Association's Mark Knopf-Thomas has told Checkpoint there are still not enough details for struggling Auckland businesses for them to plan a way forward. He says the future outlook is dire and many business owners are going into significant personal debt to keep operating. Whangare's mayor is concerned about the possibility of COVID-19 spreading undetected throughout Northland because a woman who travelled through the area while positive is being uncooperative with officials. The woman was tracked down by police last night after she was linked to another positive case last week. Both the pair have provided very little information about where they travelled and who they came into contact with. Whangare's mayor, Cheryl Mai, says that with so few locations of interest, she fears COVID has yet to be detected and it's vital people get tested. The Whangarei airport manager says security has been beefed up after a man breached alert level 3 by flying from the city to Queenstown at the weekend. The man flew from Whangarei to Wellington on Saturday, staying in a hotel before flying to Queenstown the next morning. He's since tested negative for COVID-19. The airport manager, Michael Chubb, says aviation security officers are now on duty and there are checks at the entrance. And a 34-year-old man has been charged with wasting police time following the search for a man and his children in Marokopa last month. A local woman involved in the search says the family's disappearance affected the whole community. The man will appear in Te Kuiti District Court on November the 5th. It's 24 minutes to 6. We'll have our next news and sport update at 6.
Nā mihi marama, no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins us to talk business. Nona, there's a new study, you say, that's identified some properties that are most likely to be vulnerable to a downturn in the housing market. What are the details?
Yeah, it's a report by the property research firm CoreLogic, who brings us, house valuations and that sort of information on a monthly basis. This is called the Property Vulnerability Index. Index, and it looks at a number of things. For example, credit, economic data, demand for housing, adverts, you name it, all sorts of things to look at what market is likely to be most vulnerable. And what it's found is that the major cities are moderately vulnerable to a property downturn. I mean, for example, Auckland would be seen as the most vulnerable, but Christchurch was the least vulnerable, and Wellington was, rated as relatively safe. But what properties were considered to be somewhat and or particularly vulnerable were those in communities where house price growth had been above the historic average, but the employment growth and the population growth had just continued along the same old road. So if you had seen house price hikes in excess to your economic development, you might likely see house prices fall in your region. However, despite the rising interest rates and so on, CoreLogic didn't think that we would see widespread drops in the value of housing. Never mind that prices have been way above the top anyway. Some of them are going to likely stay there.
And Nona, Transpower has apologised and taken responsibility for the power outage that was on one of the coldest days of the year. What are they saying? Yeah, so we heard from the Electricity Authority, I guess last month, and blaming Transpower systems for that blackout, which affected 34,000 people. Now, it wasn't a very long-lasting blackout, but for a person sitting in the cold, it's not going to be very pleasant. So Transpower now has done their own report, and they have done, they've said they've learned some lessons from what happened, that they are going to, well, of course, they've apologized to the communities affected, and they said that they're going to address the root causes of what caused the problem, which was basically a shortage of generation, and that was due to some planned outages, a lack of market pricing signals, and of course, the other things that they were already found to have been less than, I guess, on top of, which was communication and those types of errors. So we can expect a better performance from Transpower, at least that's what they say. Okay, well, let's take a gallop around the markets then, Nona.
Right, so our top 50 index, it ended down nearly 0.2%. That's a drop of 23 points to 12,996. That was in line with what we saw in the region in any case. The New Zealand dollar is trading at 69.3 US cents, 94.5 Australian and 51 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. That is Nona Peltier with our business news. 8,500 more people have ended up on the benefit since the start of the Delta outbreak, while job losses have been nowhere near as severe as the first national lockdown in March last year. Many thousands of whānau are still struggling to make ends meet. As part of a series on lockdown and poverty, our social issues reporter Sarah Robson looks at whether those on the lowest incomes are getting the help they need.
Before Delta hit, the labour market was running hot.
Filled jobs were continuing to rise, more people across all industries starting to get a little bit more work. We saw before lockdown as well a much improved unemployment rate, but also a much improved underutilisation rate. More Kiwis were getting into jobs, and those Kiwis who wanted to work a bit more, a few more hours a week, for example, they were getting that work as well.
But Infometrics principal economist Brad Olsen says the latest outbreak has thrown a spanner in the works.
We know that those more casual workers, that precarious workforce in general, still finds it incredibly tough during higher alert level periods, and that very much flows through to their whānau as well. We know, for example, that food grants are up 36% over the first 6 weeks of this Delta lockdown compared to the 6 weeks prior.
The number of people on the benefit had been steadily declining in recent months after the massive spike during last year's first lockdown. The return to Alert Level 4 in August is something of a setback. At the start of October, there were over 8,500 more people receiving a benefit compared to the week before the first positive case was detected. Most of that increase has been people going on to job seeker support, half of them in Auckland. Auckland City Missioner Helen Robinson says lockdowns are tough for whānau on low incomes. When people have to stay home and stick to their bubbles, they can't fall back on their usual support networks.
You might go to your grandmother's house for dinner one night a week, or the after-school program has afternoon tea so that there is food provided there. So all of those processes are actually made very, very difficult in a lockdown reality, because what a minimum income was stretched anyway, it really just gets stretched too far.
And the longer lockdown goes on, the harder it will get for low-income families to bounce back.
So if you think of people who are contractors or people on casual labour, or a family perhaps, or an extended family that was reliant on one income that has been significantly reduced, that it takes some time to recoup the loss. And the longer that we're in level 4 and level 3, actually the extent of that loss becomes more and more significant.
A $20 increase to benefits announced in May's budget kicked in at the start of July. For solo mum Jaden, it's been a big help.
That could go to something essential such as like food, power, especially during the lockdown, just because families are at home a lot. So, things are being used way more often than we would be if we weren't in lockdown.
But Brad Olsen says for others, that increase will have been eaten up by inflation.
That's meaning a number of households are having to pay a lot more for all the goods and services they might be getting. Rents, for example, probably just by themselves have taken out that extra $20.
But it's not just rising rents.
A number of households are facing substantially higher fuel costs, higher costs for food, higher costs for clothing. Everything is starting to go up and up.
Janet McAllister from the Child Poverty Action Group says to ease some of the pressure families are under, the government should bring forward next April's benefit increases.
They would have still been inadequate, but it would have been something, and they didn't. If you don't have enough, you don't have enough. And the government should have foreseen that and ensured that there was enough for communities to weather the storm of lockdown without needing to beg for food.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has signalled more support for families in hardship is being considered.
And a lot of you are getting in touch about, the troubles facing Auckland businesses. They're in almost week 9 of either being locked down or under very strict COVID restrictions, and are asking for more assistance and a timeline, and they'd like some vaccination targets so that we know what freedoms we'll get at what point along the vaccination spectrum. This person says exports are far more important for the economy than retail businesses. Hospitality is not at all essential. Understand your point there, but I'm wondering, we've just played a thing about people losing their jobs. What about jobs and connecting people to employment? A lot of people employed in these industries. Another person with a business in Ponsonby says no chance of opening till level 2, whenever that is. Redundancies coming in a very robust business. And this listener says this is a poor spin job by Grant, meaning the finance minister there. And this one says from Evan, fancy wanting targets on something that is uncharted. That's a reference to one business association wanting vaccination targets that then reflect the freedoms that people will have. Do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hey, Muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, what will businesses look like when Auckland finally loosens its COVID restrictions? A giant tick of approval. That's what parents are giving the decision to keep schools closed and mandate vaccinations for teachers. But it does mean even more time at home, and almost 2 months out of the classroom is taking its toll. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi have the story.
The sun's out in Tamaki Makaurau and parents and children are making the most of it. Hayley Thompson has just finished a group workout in Onehunga. It's keeping her sane in lockdown. The news about vaccines and no school next week is a relief.
I 100% back it because our kids can't be vaccinated, the little ones, and I have a 6-year-old, so.
But almost 2 months at home's been tough for her kids.
They need connection and they're missing their friends, and I think, they're little people that have also had feelings, so.
Simran echoes her frustration.
I was excited that schools will be open. I want the schools open.
As for vaccinations, she works in the education sector herself.
I work as a teacher and I'm vaccinated.
And you think teachers should be vaccinated?
Yep.
Why is that?
Because vaccination is a kind of prevention. It's not a basic precaution, but still it's a precaution.
Others like Kulu are more optimistic about more time at home.
Good. There's good. There's all together as family and let's just come to homework all the time from the school, every school. You know, I believe it's good. Yeah, I believe it's good. It's the number one government in the world.
Across town in Mission Bay, many are relieved kids won't be back in school next week.
Yep, I'm very worried.
So obviously happy that things aren't going back.
Hopefully that they won't go back. They will just do online learning.
Finding time to get some sun in between juggling working from home on top of schooling.
Obviously I'm working, so I just take a day off. It's hard for us, especially for the full-time parents. Lucky we got the in-laws to help us.
I think that's the right thing to do because we don't know what's going to happen and it's the kids, it's our future.
Vivian's in year 3. She's enjoying all this time to do, well, whatever she wants.
I think it's great because I like staying home sometimes.
You're enjoying being at home?
Yeah.
What have you been?
It's kind of boring.
What have you been doing with all your time?
Honestly, I don't really know. Mostly I've been lying around playing and some of that other stuff.
Are you missing your friends?
Kind of.
Alyssa is a nanny for 2 kids. She's worried about their lack of routine in lockdown.
I'm not really surprised, but I'm more concerned about when it actually will go back, whether it'll even get back this year or this month, because then it's going to be Christmas holidays. Yeah, so she started school like a couple of weeks before lockdown. So she was like brand new into school, just getting into the swing of it, and then boom, lockdown.
As she works with children, she welcomes the new vaccine rules.
It's a personal choice, and I don't think that it should be pushed on anyone, but I do understand the reasons behind it, and I do want to protect the children.
The Swan family are out enjoying some ice creams. It's been tough all working at home, so they're loving the chance to meet up with friends from one other household.
Any excuse to get out of the house and do something that's a bit different, because it's just become quite monotonous each day, and I think the kids are really missing having friends to play with and engage with and connect with, so
that's been pretty important to us, so get these guys to meet some friends and things too as they can, so it's been really nice actually.
The kids, Rebecca, Cameron and Kira, are feeling the effects of 2 months out of the classroom.
Really hard to stay motivated and actually do the work, and it's harder to learn overall.
It's really boring. There's not much to do because you've already done it all last lockdown. It's just hard to stay motivated at school. Sometimes you just go off subject. Yeah.
School and early childhood staff who have contact with children must get their first vaccination by the 15th of November this year and their second by the 1st of January next year. They'll be required to keep a register of staff who are vaccinated and ensure only immunised staff have contact with students.
And if you were listening to that story, we'll put Louisa Marika's piece up on our Facebook page so you can check out the video. We're all being encouraged to ditch the petrol and diesel vehicles and go electric, but the cars can be expensive and the bikes might sound like a bit too much hard work. Enter Street Dog, an e-moped made by Wellington-based company FTN Motion. Its first production run sold out and there's now a wait list of people trying to secure the second run. Founder and designer Luke Sinclair joins us now. Kia ora, Luke. So it's true, is it? Mopeds are cool again.
That's what we're trying to do, Lisa. No, that's the idea behind it.
Yeah, so explain your thinking here because it's quite a jazzy design. Describe it to us.
Yeah, well, I suppose what we really wanted to do was just make great-looking mopeds and motorbikes that also just happen to be highly practical, fun, and I suppose happen to be electric as well. Really, so what we really wanted to just prioritise, I suppose, really how we can make EVs fit into people's lives better. So instead of looking at guilting or forcing people to ride EVs, really giving them the options that would really suit their lifestyle, and it also just happens to be electric. So that's really where the idea sprang up for the Street Dog.
So can you tell us a little bit about its specs? I mean, how fast can this thing go? How long does it run for? How long will it take you to recharge it?
Yeah, so 50 k's an hour for the first one. So that puts it in the moped class. So that's like your 50cc scooters. So that means you don't need a motorcycle license. You can ride it on any car license. You can get 100 k's of range from one battery charge, and it's got about 30 litres of storage. So yeah, hoping to make just a really practical commuter for going around the city, whether you're sort of going to work or going to do groceries.
So has it got enough guts to get up the Wellington Hills?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So plenty for that, and that's kind of part of the reason we moved down to Wellington to start this, was really for that, testing it with the wind as well, and just having a city where you've got a highly centralised population with lots of 50k an hour roads, so it's really easy to get around.
When I said to you, so mopeds are cool again, I kind of wasn't joking. This thing is, well, it looks different to what you imagine your kind of grandfather or your great-grandfather riding. It's sort of, wow, it looks like something Burt Munro would ride. So tell me about the design, how you settled on the aesthetic of it.
Yeah, so it started about 5 years ago. So Kendall, the other founder, and myself, we've been mates since we were about 12 or 13, I think. We went through school at Pukekohe High, and then went off to study engineering at Waikato together. And studied and lived together for a long time. And Kendall started looking at electric conversions about 5 or 6 years ago. And then we both got into this idea of putting together our own electric moped. So ended up with the first one, which wasn't anything pretty. It was just a BMX with a bunch of batteries glad wrapped to the frame and a cheap motor on it. And it just came clear to us really quickly that just in terms of performance and functionality, electric was already going to outperform all the petrol equivalents. But there just seemed to be this lameness and kind of associated with electric vehicles, and we really wanted to break that down. So from there, it was really looking at how we could. Well, I suppose EVs. With EVs, there's like unlimited amounts of innovation going on at the moment, but a lot of the great designs have already been made. So it was really looking at how we could bring something in, like from some of the more classic motorcycle designs that that everyone already has that familiarity with it, and I think that's really what's connected with people.
So, how much would this thing set you back, and how does that compare to, say, a car or an electric bike?
So we're looking at 9,000 at the moment. So, and that's the price of and it might come down as we can scale. But if you look at premium end e-bikes, you can get some for around the same price. And we think just the advantages you have in terms of being able to travel with the traffic, get up those hills, you've got 100 k's of range, and you've got really genuinely practical storage. I think it's a fairly fair price.
So how long's the wait list? And for you guys, I mean, what are you looking at in terms of scaling up production? I mean, what does success look like for you?
So Street Dog is just the start. We want to look to develop a range of two-wheeled options for both urban and open road. And I suppose looking to move into overseas markets into next year. But at the moment, just really focusing on production and getting a good quality, good-looking product out there.
So have you had any hassles with parts and components? Because obviously we've heard a lot recently about freight during these COVID times. It has been really challenging. But one good thing that's come from that is we've actually focused more on local production and manufacturers. And it's been really handy actually to build those local relationships in New Zealand, and actually makes the whole thing a lot easier to control in terms of quality and getting through these initial R&D stages to getting a safe and good working product out there. Really good to talk to you, Luke. Best of luck. That is Luke Sinclair, and he's one of the founding partners and designers for Street Dog, which is this e-moped. It's pretty jazzy looking. Check it out we'll put the video up on our Facebook page, not like the mopeds of old. Australia has entered a new era of the pandemic, with New South Wales now one day into living with COVID. With widespread lockdowns becoming a thing of the past, many Sydney-siders are trying to keep a sense of pragmatism and caution. Here's the ABC's Gavin Coote.
As the first day out of lockdown in New South Wales came to a close, Sydney-siders like Chris were basking in the new freedoms at a local pub.
The bottom line is it's important that hospitality comes together and that people understand the value of food and how much we've sacrificed over these lockdown periods.
The Sydney chef had his hours cut during the long lockdown, and although that'll change as fully vaccinated residents are allowed back into hospitality and entertainment venues, he's still cautious.
Knowing that I would say a large amount of cases are coming from hospitality venues, I think for sure we're going to see some spikes, 100%. But until we can learn to live with that, we're going to be stuck in the same loophole of lockdowns. We can't just lock down every time we have cases.
Others are being more cautious. Giovanna helps run a cafe in central Sydney. She's been enjoying an after-work beer across the street, but says nothing's changed at her work just yet.
For now, for this week, we decided to keep takeaway. We might ask for people to see their vaccine cards, or we might just keep it takeaway. We're not too sure yet.
So you're not rushing into things then?
We're not rushing. We want to see how it goes. Like, I'm from Brazil, and then I see in Brazil the situation was so bad, and now everything's open again. So, yeah, but I do agree that we should open step by step instead.
The modelling done for the New South Wales government had predicted up to 2,000 daily cases by late October and more than 500 people in ICU. While ICU numbers are down to 153, Dr Danielle McMullen, who's the New South Wales president of the Australian Medical Association, is still a little uneasy.
From a health system perspective, we're certainly reopening in a better position than we thought we might be. It's not smooth sailing in the hospitals at the moment. They still are very busy, and we've still got pauses on most elective surgeries and other tests and treatments and things that people would otherwise expect to have available.
She's also worried that unvaccinated people might flout the rules which restrict the number of visitors to your home to 10 fully vaccinated people.
We tend to let our guard down at home. It feels safe when you're with people that you know and love, but actually it's one of the highest risk places to pick up COVID-19 and to spread it around. It really is a bit of an experiment at the moment. It's step by step to see how COVID responds to us relaxing restrictions. But at the moment, given that it's just vaccinated people that should be out and about, we're hopeful that any increase in cases that we see is of mainly mild illness.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Marama Tipole. An Auckland business leader says it's time to spell out what vaccination rate is needed to allow firms to trade normally. Hospitality and retailers have been promised more detail on how they can operate once vaccine passports are issued. Newmarket Business Association Mark Knopf-Thomas says those rules are taking too long to come to light. He's told Checkpoint the government is failing to notice a rising frustration among Auckland business owners.
There seems to be no pathway coming out of how people can sort of cling on to or work to get their businesses back up and running. There are no targets being set. All the Prime Minister was talking about is picnics, bubbles and Vaxathons. I don't think they understand the sentiment in the business world at all.
Mark Knopf-Thomas says many business owners are going into significant debt just to keep operating. A Whangarei Health Trust says it's seen around 30 gang members and their whānau get COVID vaccinations over recent days. Te Hau a Whiowhio o Tangarei Trust has ramped up testing and vaccinations following the positive tests of 2 Auckland women who visited Northland illegally. The Trust's chief executive, Martin Kaipo, says the people coming forward aren't involved with the positive cases but have been encouraged to get vaccinated by their leaders.
There's been a lot of discussion around gangs and their activities. We've had a lot of gang members come forward to get the vaccination, them and their partners, which is really good. It shows that they're thinking about it as well. And what's happened over the weekend with their leaders coming forward has been encouraging for the members to also step up.
Martin Kaipo says as many people as possible need to get tested in Te Tai Tokerau to make sure COVID isn't spreading. The Mayor of Queenstown Lake says the Whangarei lockdown breach is a wake-up call for locals. The man travelled from Whangarei to Queenstown via Wellington without appropriate travel documents over the weekend. Jim Bolt says the breach is a stark reminder for residents that they're far from immune to potential exposure. He's calling on locals to get fully vaccinated. Mr Bolt says the district relies significantly on visitors, so it's vital to protect people's health and livelihoods. The man is self-isolating in Queenstown and returned a negative COVID test today. An economist says inflation and rising household costs are likely to have whittled away July's $20 boost to benefits. 8,500 more people have ended up on the benefit since the start of the Delta outbreak. While numbers are rising, it's nowhere near as dramatic as the spike seen during the first lockdown last year. But Infometrics economist Brad Olsen says there are still plenty of whānau doing it tough. In addition to that, he says increases to government support aren't keeping pace with inflation.
That's meaning a number of households are having to pay a lot more for all the goods and services they might be getting. Rents, for example, probably just by themselves have taken out that extra $20.
Brad Olsen says the rising cost of food, clothing and fuel is exacerbating hardship. The Prime Minister says modelling of the Delta outbreak suggests the number of new daily cases could hit triple digits, but vaccination could stop that. The R value indicates the rate of spread and measures the number of secondary infections caused by someone with COVID-19. Jacinda Ardern says the R value currently sits between 1.2 and 1.3.
Over a 2-week period, you may see a doubling in cases, but it very much depends on whether we sit closer to 1.2 or 1.3. We do need everyone's help to continue to comply with those restrictions, but also we are seeing the impact of vaccinations. They are already affecting the growth in the outbreak and helping to control it, and it's why vaccines and following the rules are so important.
During the first wave of infections in March 2020, the R value was estimated at 1.8 before the move into Alert Level 4. There are 43 new community cases of COVID-19 today, 40 in Tāmaki Makaurau and 3 in Waikato. The national grid operator Transpower has apologised for its shortcomings that led to widespread power blackouts in August. Last month, the Electricity Authority said Transpower's systems for allocating demand and its communication were unsatisfactory and confused local lines companies. Transpower has released its own independent report into the incident this afternoon, outlining a number of causes. Chief Executive Alison Andrews says improvements need to be made.
What we can do better is improve our communications with industry participants. We don't see how much controllable demand that they have. That's things like hot water, where distribution companies can manage that rather than disconnecting customers.
Alison Andrews says work is underway to avoid a repeat of the blackouts. It's 6:05. In sports now, winning rather than experimentation remains the priority for Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua going into tonight's third and final match against the Aotearoa men in Wellington. The Ferns have an unassailable 2-0 lead, giving Taurua the option of playing some of her less experienced players a run. But she says with uncertainty over future international games, she's keen to continue developing her top lineup.
I really want to make sure that we get the best people out there just so that we can just keep momentum and make sure that we are improving. And I don't want to disrespect the men either. They've done awesome for us, so we want to make sure that we honour them being out there as well.
The All Whites midfield will be under pressure to fill the void left by Sarpreet Singh against Bahrain early tomorrow morning. Singh was a strong performer in the All Whites 2-1 win over Kurarao at the weekend, but has now returned to his club side in Germany. All Whites coach Danny Hay says Singh's departure provides an opportunity for other players in a big match.
So there's going to be, a fair bit of, weight on their shoulders to be creative, to try and create those little moments for the likes of Woodsy and others, goal-scoring opportunities, which Sarpreet did very well the other day.
The South Island women's team in next year's Super Rugby Aupiki will be called Matatu. Matatu, which means steadfast, will join the Blues, Chiefs and Hurricanes in the competition, which was launched by New Zealand Rugby last week. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nina Hall from Johns Hopkins University is back in New Zealand and she'll bring us up to date on the German election results. In the sampler, Tony Stamp brings us Mia Doi-Todd, Vera Allen and Ramona Gonzalez, aka Night Jewel. And how can camels help us extend the life of medicines? That's on Nights with me, Karen Hay, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
RNZ National now looking at the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Fine spells and a few showers clearing from Auckland southwards tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine. A few showers south of Hastings spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihapea to Wellington. Also wided up at scattered showers, some heavy with hail today, turning to rain in Wellington and wided up for a time tomorrow with southerly gales. Snow to 900 metres. Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough except the Kaikoura coast. Scattered showers, possibly heavy with hail and mainly fine weather for tomorrow. Canterbury and the Kaikoura coast, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow with snow to about 500 metres. Severe southwest gales about Banks Peninsula easing tomorrow. For Westland, mainly fine. The odd shower today. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers with snow above 400 metres, easing tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, periods of rain. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Nā mihi marama, no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's been almost 9 weeks in the trenches for Auckland businesses physically shut due to COVID restrictions and still no date for when they'll be able to open to customers. There's growing calls for wage subsidies to be guaranteed until Christmas and for more targeted help for those industries most in need. The government yesterday decided to keep the Super City at its current alert settings, meaning it's in limbo at least until next week's Cabinet review. Auckland Chamber of Commerce CEO Michael Barnett joins me now. Hi Michael, which businesses are hurting the most here?
I think it's predominantly the small, medium businesses, and what I think we really need to do is differentiate between big business and small business, because when government and Treasury and Reserve Bank talk about the economy doing well or the businesses being resilient, it is the big end of town, and it's the small end of town that have really been punished by not being able to operate.
Well, to that end, I just want to read you a couple of pieces of feedback we've had and give you an opportunity to answer to them. So one listener's texted us saying, exports are far more important for the economy than retail businesses. Hospitality is not at all essential. And another one says, it is harsh to say, but retail and hospitality businesses quickly revive. They're not fundamental to the long-run strength of the economy. The balance of payments is robust. So a pretty cut and dry attitude towards some of the smaller business operators. What do you say in response to that?
And I think that my opening comment probably stands, because if you have a look at the big end of town, if you are an exporter, you've been involved in the supply chain, the last couple of months would have been okay for you. I think the relationship between Australia and China has seen our exports of meat and other products into China operate well and do very well. What we also need to remember, if we go back to June of this year, you can probably say that the economy was going great. A big part of that economy was our hospitality, was tourism, and it does make up a significant part of our economy when all is doing well. I accept we're in bad times. I accept there are sectors that are doing very well. The decision from government is whether they look at the small, medium business sector and support it, and to what degree they'll do that.
And what do you think is the degree of support that is required, and for who exactly?
I think if I look at the rule book, I can go back to last year, and we made some rules about, if your turnover's down 30% or 40%. We haven't changed that, and yet we probably could, because we're saying to businesses, if you're down 30% or 40%, you can apply for the resurgence payment, or you can apply for the wage subsidy. The irony is, if you're down 30%, you get exactly the same amount of support as a business who's down 100%. I think we probably could have refined that. So that'd be the first observation. I think my second observation would be that the uncertainty is probably the biggest damage to business. They can't see a plan. They can't see a finish line, and that's frustrating for them because if there is no plan there for the environment in which they're going to operate in, they can't make a plan for what they're going to do.
Two things there, Michael. When you talk about the subsidy being more nuanced, basically, would you give more money to people with higher losses, or would you simply cut the amount you're giving to people with losing less money?
I wouldn't want to do a knee-jerk on that. I just think we need to revisit it. And some of that is going to come from looking at it from an economic development perspective. If we believe that we're going to get back into the tourism sector, that we are going to open our borders and it's going to be a big part of our economy, then we need to work out to what degree are we going to support it in the interim. And I say that because these businesses aren't just businesses. They're people, they're homes, they're mortgages, they're the dreams that people have had. And just to be able to let them go, I don't believe is a reasonable ask.
What then is the real cost, do you think, of not supporting these businesses?
I think the real cost, and the first big one in my opinion, would be people costs and the damage that you do to relationships, the damage that you do to our innovators, our creators, the people that have started businesses in the hope of doing some, have run them for 10 years, have got something that was there and was good, and today it's very, very doubtful if they'll survive. I think the people cost is extremely high. The reality is that if some businesses go, new businesses will follow, and that's the nature of it. But for us to have allowed it to happen, we do need to be able to counter the people cost.
When you talk about the need for certainty, here's the conundrum, right? COVID is very uncertain in terms of what it does, where it goes, how big it gets, whether we manage to ring fence it. There is so much uncertainty around a pandemic. How can we have certainty for business in such an uncertain, unpredictable environment?
If I go to my board at the beginning of a year with a plan, and that plan's an expression of my best intentions and what I expect to be able to achieve, and I communicate that, and I communicated it clearly and articulately. If conditions change and they vary and the plan has to change, I have to reassess, I have to recalculate, but I also have to recommunicate. And the same thing, I have to put in new targets, and if I do, I have to communicate that. And this is exactly the same with government. If there is a plan and the conditions change, or there are variables, we need to start with good communication and all the way through have good communication with everybody and have good communication because of good partnerships and good information.
I'm wondering, Michael, when we move to the next step in Auckland, we don't know when that's going to be, when some businesses can open, outside groups can move to 25, it is from memory. Are you talking to people like the council about how we can reimagine what our city might look like? For example, whether some areas might be, cut off to cars just for pedestrians, businesses can put things outside, more tables can go outside. Are any of those conversations happening?
No, but what a great opportunity that would have been for Auckland, and whether it's the council or the business organisations. But what are we going to do to encourage people to come in and retail? What are we going to do to make sure that all of our office workers, instead of staying at home to improve productivity, we might tell a story of bringing them back into Auckland, of restaurants and entertainment and retail and so on. To do that would take courage and it would take innovation and creativity, but we haven't done that. We've been immersed in managing a day-to-day with COVID.
So whose fault is that?
I think it's everybody's fault. It takes some leadership, whether or not it's the leadership of council or the leadership of business or just a collective leadership. But I do believe that it is an opportunity to rewrite a book of what Auckland Central might be.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That's Michael Barnett, who's the CEO of the Auckland Chamber of Commerce. Supershot Saturday is coming and it'll be broadcast on a screen near you. The government's taking a page out of the history books with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announcing a Vaxathon, a telethon for Pfizer.
The Vaxathon will go live across the country, highlighting vaccine initiatives from Cape Reinga to the Bluff and urging anyone who hasn't been vaccinated yet to make Saturday the day for their first dose, and anyone who has been 3 weeks or longer since their first dose to get their second. The Vaxathon will include real-time data on how each region is tracking with vaccination uptake throughout the day. There will be prizes locally for those getting vaccinated, information from experts on the safety of the vaccine, and some healthy competition between towns and regions. Vaccinations will be available throughout the day and into the night on Saturday across GP clinics, many of whom are opening especially for the day. Pharmacies, marae, churches, mosques, community centres, workplaces and drive-through centres.
And she's hoping a record-breaking number of people will turn out.
Nationwide, we have the capacity to administer well over 100,000 vaccines in a single day. That would lift our vaccination rates considerably. There is nothing stopping us other than people showing up. Our current vaccination record for a single day is 93,334 vaccines in one day, which was on the 26th of August. And our biggest number of vaccines in a single week is 552,586, and that was the week ending the 5th of September. So those are the records that we should try and beat this week.
It's as the Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, shared the number of fully vaccinated people who've been hospitalised during this most recent outbreak.
Of the 158 people hospitalised to date since the start of the outbreak, only 3 of those 158 were fully vaccinated with sufficient time, that is 14 days, to have passed for them to develop full immunity. It reinforces the huge protection that vaccination offers.
There are 34 people currently being treated for COVID-19 in hospital, with 1 person on ventilation. Dr Bloomfield also announced 43 new community cases of COVID today, 40 in Auckland and 3 in Waikato. 19 of today's cases are unlinked, but interviews with health officials are still underway. And the movements of the 2 Auckland women who travelled to Te Tai Tokerau and later tested positive for COVID are finally starting to emerge. The second of the women to test positive is now said to be helping health authorities, with the subway in Whangarei listed as a location of interest. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says some contacts have been identified and more will follow.
There are currently 18 close contacts associated with the original case, and of these 17 have been located and tested and are isolating. The remaining person is being actively followed up by our contact tracers. Our public health staff in Auckland are working closely with both cases to determine any further locations of interest or exposure events, and are making progress there. Any new locations of interest will be added to the Ministry's website.
The Director-General of Health there. It is almost 20 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Doctors in Australia are warning thousands of people with life-threatening or debilitating illnesses are missing out on treatment due to the pandemic. Already more than 10,000 Australians waiting for joint replacement surgery are facing lengthy delays. And it's estimated about 3,000 cancer cases have been missed in Victoria in the past 18 months. Here's the ABC's Stephanie Smale.
Since the pandemic began, doctors say they've noticed people avoiding their GP and putting off cancer screening.
This is the biggest challenge the Australian healthcare system has faced.
Professor Grant MacArthur is the Executive Director of the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre and co-chairs the Victorian COVID-19 Cancer Task Force.
Cancers that are delayed in their diagnosis can progress to a more advanced stage and be harder to treat, be harder to cure. And so getting these cases diagnosed is a priority.
Non-urgent elective surgery's been suspended in New South Wales and Victoria, and even when restrictions in those states begin to ease and those procedures resume, he's worried about the strain on the hospital system and its staff.
As the COVID caseloads increase and there will be unprecedented demand on our hospital systems for emergency services, for intensive care services, that coupled with these delayed diagnoses in cancer, we have real concern about the system being able to cope over the next 12 months.
Professor MacArthur says vaccination will help with that.
You know, we do, by world standards, have an excellent healthcare system. People are well trained. We have good public health policies, such as screening for cancer, that really is, state of the art. But we've got an unprecedented situation with additional illness, with people getting COVID. And so vaccination, that's our way of mitigating that. That's the number 1, 2 and 3 most important thing, is to get the community vaccinated.
There are warnings from doctors with patients waiting for joint replacements too. The president of the Australian Orthopaedic Association, Dr Michael Gillespie, says about 7,000 people already waiting for joint replacement surgery have missed out due to lockdowns, and there are about 4,000 more who should have been on the list.
It means an increasing number of Australians are left languishing with debilitating chronic conditions that very badly impact their own personal health, but become an increasing burden on the community.
Dr Gillespie warns it could take years to clear the waiting lists. He says private health insurers, flush with cash not spent on elective surgeries, are planning to help. But he warns public hospitals will need more funding too.
The private sector has plenty of money to throw at the problem, and we're working with them to try and make sure that the private sector resources are used in the most efficient and cost-effective way. But the public sector will need more funds injected to try and get through the backlog.
And that report from Stephanie Smale in Australia. A lot of you are getting in touch about which professions should be made to get vaccinated. This listener says vaccine mandates are draconian, unethical and discriminatory. No one should be forced. We need proper informed consent. On the other hand, others disagree. Hairdressers, supermarket people, fuel station workers, definitely teachers, etc. should all be vaccinated, this person says. Someone else agrees. Any client-facing public servant, the public needs confidence their tax-funded servant is safe. The most vulnerable most need the protection. And there's a lot more on that as well. We'll hopefully get to more of it before we head off. Archaeologists in Israel have discovered a 1,500-year-old winery they say was, at the time, the world's largest. Dating from the early Byzantine era, it's been found south of Tel Aviv. The white wine was exported to Mediterranean countries. As the BBC's Daniel Mann reports, the excavation shows just how big an industry wine had become.
I'm sitting at the moment in the midst of a large wine press on the trading floor. This is just one of 5 large wine presses at this site.
As John Seligman from the Israel Antiquities Authority speaks to the camera, a drone moves over the site. Nestled between tower blocks and red-roofed houses is a former winery, stretching over a square kilometre. Its stone warehouses, fermenting basins and kilns to make the dozens of clay storage jugs, discovered even with their stoppers, are so well preserved it's been easy for the archaeologists to map out how the wine was made there. Among the larger finds are far smaller ones, grape seeds which, according to Mr. Seligman, could shed some light on the taste of the white wine.
The question that we have is what were the grape varieties that were drunk at that time? We don't know the answer. What we're trying to do is to get information from the DNA from the pips themselves. They will be sent for scientific analysis, and maybe we'll be able to identify either an existing or still existing grape variety which was used for the wine, or maybe we're talking about an extinct variety which was used for this wine, which we just don't know exactly what it was, but we will learn maybe of what its DNA was from the analysis.
It was known as the Gaza and Ashkelon wine, as it was named after the nearby ports from where it was shipped overseas. It's estimated 2 million litres were made every year. Hagit Torga, also from the Israel Antiquities Authority, says that wine was preferable to water, which wasn't safe, and that it was of a high quality.
The wine was probably sweet. The taste of Europeans at that period was a sweet wine, because a lot of times, in order to prevent from getting sick from the water, you pour wine into the water, and then even babies and small children drank water with wine, and the sweet taste of the wine sweetens the water, and it was a real hit during the Byzantine period.
Some of the wine presses date back even further, from the Persian era, 2,300 years ago. And once preservation work has been completed, it's hoped the site will be open to the public.
Daniel Mann reporting. In less than 48 hours, the legendary Star Trek actor William Shatner will blast off into space, and at 90, he will be the oldest person to have made it into space. He'll be on board a rocket funded by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. The BBC's Sophie Long has more.
As cool and calm as Captain James T. Kirk. For decades, he played a character synonymous with space exploration. Now, at 90 years of age, he's preparing to boldly go where no living sci-fi star has gone before, proving you're never too old to really be who you want to be.
What a thing to have. He's the oldest guy that went into space. I want to have the vision. I want to see space. I want to see the Earth. I want to see what we need to do to save Earth. I want to have a perspective that hasn't been shown to me before.
And you're going to hear the engine cut off. His highly anticipated blast-off has reignited interest in both the Star Trek
Did exactly what I would have done.
and Blue Origin brands, taking the world of PR to a stratospheric level.
Now, fire blind, lay down a pattern.
This second Blue Origin passenger flight comes after employees claimed the company had a toxic environment and failed to adhere to proper safety protocols, accusations it denies.
That just hasn't been my experience at Blue. We're exceedingly thorough. I've worked on New Shepard for 8 years now in a variety of roles, and I can't say enough about the team of professionals that work on this program from the earliest days up through now as we've started our human flights, and safety has always been our top priority.
Rocket man, burning out his fuse out here alone.
There's debate over whether they'll return to Earth astronauts, but as Shatner said, he will be a real rocket man. He'll experience weightlessness during a journey that should last less than 11 minutes. The billionaires leading this space race say it's more than a rocket-fueled ego trip. They claim it could help us all to live long and prosper.
Wow, beam him up, Scotty. Bit of feedback before we head off. John, on the Commonwealth Games and what sports should be in there. Skateboarding would be preferable to boxing, says John, at the Olympics because it doesn't involve deliberately injuring your competitor. And this one's interesting too, about the lockdown. They say South Auckland is chock full of talented young people, especially in the music business. Let the government ante up a significant prize, including a recording contract for the best theme song around vaccination. I'm sure bored young people would connect with others to get vaxxed. What do you think? Worth a try. And more feedback on... Oh, actually, let's go to this one about getting tested in Northland. Kevin's got in touch to say there are too few COVID testing sites in Northland. Kevin says, I live in Russell and the closest is in Kerikeri, which is a $15 ferry trip and a 1-hour return car trip. If the government wants to know how widespread the outbreak is, more test sites would be helpful, says Kevin. Thanks for getting in touch, Kevin. That's about all we've got time for. Now, the late news team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō. And tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up speaks to a father who's in limbo. He's unable to secure an MIQ spot to get here to see his wife, who gave birth to their first child unexpectedly at 26 weeks. We're back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Catriona McLeod. An Auckland business leader has told Checkpoint